Hello and welcome to Astrology Conversations. Today we're going to be talking about Apollo, and I think I've kind of got quite a controversial, perhaps for some people, maybe not for us, but for some people, quite a controversial take on Apollo, which really comes from his mythology around Gaia and Daphne, the priestess, the first oracular priestess at Delphi, that we're going to be talking about. But by and large, if you Google Apollo as an asteroid, it universally comes up with, and this is true, he's the god of light, he's connected to the sun and Leo. He's an indicator in your chart of where you have gifts in the arts, and especially the healing arts. So the Apollo temples in ancient Greece were healing temples that used the arts. And from the beginning of our temple, which started at the beginning of Venus retrograde in winter solstice 2021, was when the kind of inner level temple came, and I kind of felt it to be a temple of Apollo, and also Hygeia, which is a dreaming temple, a more kind of feminine version of that. So it's really interesting to me how things have evolved, who's joined, that Eve started her art class, that celestial communication, which for me is kind of our form of dance that we can do on Zoom and not in the real life temple. It's like, well, we couldn't get anything better really than celestial communication for the way we're operating. So this is a kind of, you think of it as an Aquarian Apollo temple. So I feel that what I'm talking about today is really important, because it maybe helps us address a kind of origin wound in the lineage that we are part of. And I say we are part of because if you've arrived here, I'm going to assume you're part of the lineage of the priestesses of these temples, and we've reincarnated here. Almost, I feel, to play with the energies. We're here to create something new, using those creative energies at their heart. It's all quite light, really, what we're here to do, and use kind of these technologies available to us. And really, we're discovering that our bodies and our voices are our like prime tools of transformation. Okay, so I just want to go back a bit. Not everyone was in the group at that time when we talked about the trans-Neptunian object called Albion. And Albion is an ancient name in Britain, and it's also specifically linked to Scotland. And we actually discussed Albion at a time when both myself and Tara were heading off to Scotland. So that was quite a lot of synchronicity. So Albion was actually the first trans-Neptunian object to be discovered. And all these objects are bringing in like streams, hundreds and hundreds of streams of indigenous wisdom. And Albion relates to these streams of wisdom from the United Kingdom islands. And in my own journeys, it's quite interesting because when I did a DNA test, I'm like 65% English, which was a massive disappointment to me. But I've kind of realized, this is my karma, is to clear up the English DNA, the colonizers, one of the key colonizers in the world. alongside the Spanish. The Portuguese were not quite as brutal generally as the English and the Spanish. They sort of feel a bit different to me, but really what we're talking about here today is the way that Ireland, Scotland and Wales were the first places to be colonized by the English. So that involved the removal of people from the most fertile lands that were then given to wealthy landowners or other incoming people. You know, the kind of desecration of sacred graveyards, that kind of thing, and also the repression of language, Gaelic, Welsh, and these are still like huge issues in Britain. So these languages are making a comeback. But I remember, like, when I was in Scotland, the person I was staying with, her mother was talking about when she was a child, she remembers a boy at school being like brutally beaten up by a teacher for speaking Gaelic. So, you know, it's left a lot of traumas in the DNA. And these often show up as addiction patterns. So the Highlands, for example, of Scotland, where a lot of the stuff took place, has huge addiction problems. Ireland is another one, mainly around alcohol. And yes, so there's still a big collective trauma. So I wrote this book, Walking Beauty, that some of you know about, and I took it off to America, to California. And what was really interesting is how many conversations and times it kind of came up around the impact of the continuing impact of colonization, how we kind of move from this kind of very linear Western mindset into a more, I'd like to think of it as a spiraling and undulating, a more poetic, right-brained way of thinking. And really, we want to use both sides of our brain. But the right side is the side that sees things more holistically. It's more timeless. It's more patient, therefore. And really, when we're doing like the Gene Keys work, the contemplation, it's really teaching us to use our right brain to approach things with inquiry, with tenderness, with patience. These are all very right brain qualities, and you will find them really embedded in indigenous cultures around the planet, rather than the sort of snatch and grab of the left brain, which is quite a fearful, has quite a fearful side, and it just kind of wants to grab things, and it wants to pigeonhole everything, and it wants to understand how things work. So it's all part of our evolution, of course, to have the side of our brain. But so I'm not saying we should dismiss it, but rather that we should understand its limitations when it's not kind of working with the right side of the brain as well. And this whole colonization story, the impact of the trauma of that, you know, it affects people from those indigenous groups, but it also affects the Western, the colonizers. And this is like a huge thing I discovered through being a white South African, really, is that if you are the colonizer and the usurper, the oppressor of other people, you are not living from your humanity, and therefore you are creating suffering for yourself and for others. So even though the colonizers seemingly come off best, in the big picture of things, the colonizers are really traumatized too. And so what's interesting is what you see with the UK story is people who were colonized then went off to America, New Zealand, and colonized those places and displaced the Maori, the Aboriginal people, the Native Americans without a second thought, really, as to this had been done to them, and now they were going to do this to other things. Yeah, what goes around comes around. So it's our job, really, as I see it now, to really contemplate the meaning of this in our own lineage, whichever side we happen to come from, or we might happen to actually come from both sides, and to also recognize that urge in ourselves that comes up, perhaps it starts as a feeling of jealousy or as a feeling of envy, or a feeling of entitlement to something, but this something really belongs to someone else. So it's really being incredibly mindful, I think, about what we are taking and what we are giving. And this kind of sacred reciprocity is also at the heart of all Indigenous ways of being, and I believe the foundation of a new world is actually simply to live in sacred reciprocity, and everything will balance out then. So yeah, it's really to address at the deepest level. And possibly our Apollo can show us firstly where we have art and creativity as our gifts, but it can also show us, maybe in relation to other planets, the house it's in, where we might have a tendency to maybe take from other people. So I know, like, for example, I have Apollo in Leo, which is the creative sign. And when I was younger, I didn't kind of really believe in my own creativity. And I used to like, not really consciously, but sort of unconsciously take other people's stuff and use it. And maybe I still do unconsciously, but I'm much more mindful about that. And I remember my Reiki teacher once having their real go at me about saying, you've just taken my creative idea and used it. And I was like, oh my God, I felt so terrible. But she was right, actually, that I had, and I'd done it completely unconsciously. So we all have that tendency, it's part of the culture to do that. In fact, it's rewarded. That kind of usurper archetype is seen as a very successful kind of person in our culture. So, it's no one's questioning that, really. Okay, so let's have a look at Apollo. So what we're going to do is look at Apollo's presentation, and then, we can have a conversation. You can maybe share if the story resonates with you in any way, or just your reaction to this. Okay, so there's two Apollo bodies. Apollo asteroid is hashtag 1862. It looks like Kim Gould is putting it on Taraka because he's on there, but then it just says North next to it. So you're going to have to do this on astro.com and put 1862 in the extended numbers. If you have any problems with that, let me know and I'll help you. And then Apollon, H44, is a Uranian body, and he is on Taraka. Today I'm mostly going to do asteroid Apollo, but these Uranian bodies, they're out in the area of the solar system where Uranus is. And they're kind of like the North Node in that they're not an actual physical body. They're more like an energetic presence. But I find them very interesting, and they definitely sort of resonate for me. Okay, so let's have a look at the birth of Apollo. This is a really important part of the myth. So Jupiter, Zeus, there's a Uranian Zeus which is H42, mates with Leto or Leto, the prophetess, much to the outrage of his wife Hera, who's also known as Juno. They are both asteroids too. Hera declares Leto may not give birth on land, and so Leto goes to Delos, an island not connected to the sea floor, and she goes into labor. Hera then suspends Leto in a painful birth for many days and sends the oracular Python of Delphi to attack her. Nonetheless, Leto gives birth to twins, Apollo and Artemis. So Apollo's first act is to go and kill the Python who attacked his mother at birth, thus usurping the power of the Delphi Oracle for himself. And you'll remember last week when we did Gaia, that Gaia, i.e. Earth, was the first oracle at Delphi. And so Apollo kind of usurps power of Gaia and becomes the kind of godhead, if you like, of the Delphi Oracle. And in addition to that, he takes the power of the muses in a further myth, thus becoming the god of art, music, and dance. In all his healing temples, these art forms are used. And I've said before that I feel we are in that lineage here in the Venus Moon Mystery School on Soul Tribe Online, which, by the way, anyone can join. So it now falls to us and others like us to purify the corruption of the oracular powers, to return them to their rightful place in the divine feminine energy, reawaken the ancient serpent that lies within our DNA. In our next astrology session, which isn't next week, it'll be the week after, we're going to do a light language healing for Gaia, Daphne, Pythia, and the priestess of the rose and bees lineage. So we're going to do an energetic process around the healing of this. That's going to be on the 8th of May. So really, it's through this story that I perceive Apollo as the first colonizer or usurper in our Western mythology, thus providing a vital key to heal all that transpired and followed in its wake. So we could see this Apollo myth as an origin wound of this impulse to usurp and colonize others. So it's at this time we see the heroes start to kill the serpent or the dragon, whether it's Perseus, Hercules, St. George, or St. Michael. And Demeter George, who is she's the first big goddess asteroid astrologer, she ties this change in attitude towards dragons and serpents to the changing of our pole star from Draconis to Polaris in the Great Bear constellation, round about 1,500 years ago. And I like to think of myself as a dragon soother and definitely a friend. I know quite a few of us here have the 26 gene key, which I kind of associate with my very dragony, my love of dragons, let's put it that way. Okay, oh, lost. I have to go back. Hold on, let me just going back to the slide I was on. Okay, so let's talk about Apollo and Daphne. So Daphne is a water sprite, and she becomes the first kind of, she's not quite human, but the first sort of human form of an oracular priestess following Gaia. So this is quite interesting for me because it suggests a separation. So we have this capacity to hear directly from Gaia. And then when this Apollo myth comes along, Apollo, what shifts is that we now have a priestess, which suggests we need a human mouthpiece in order to hear Gaia, and the direct connection begins to be lost for many people, perhaps as the left brain starts to kind of come into its own in that evolutionary process. So in this myth, Apollo falls in love with Daphne and he's chasing after her. I mean, you can look at it several ways. He's in love with her, or he's kind of more, it's more of a rape situation. So there's a bit of ambivalence there, you might say. But if we look at the big picture, you know, this god Apollo, he's killed this incredibly huge python that's like hundreds of years old, that's the Oracle. So Daphne's probably not that keen on him, and she runs away. She cries out to Gaia to help her, and Gaia turns her into a laurel tree. So in the context of all we've been doing with the mother tree and the universal tree of life, I was quite fascinated by this because the tree of life is the way through the Kabbalah, through many shamanic traditions, I think all of them actually, that we communicate with these other dimensions. We communicate with Gaia through the underworld in the roots, the middle world, and then the upper world. So the dream arc is actually created on that sort of patterning as well, the Gene Keys dream arc. Okay, so probably said some of this. Daphne was a nymph and the first priestess of Delphi. So she was protecting her chastity. Encoded in the story is also the primal push and pull of the male and female, and the loss of respect for the priestess, the female. As I become more embodied, I find much of the issues in my body showing up as pain and inflammation in my hips, somehow connected to this dishonoring of the female sexual energy by the kind of male culture that I grew up in. But now primarily by myself, you know, I'm learning to really honor my body and my sexuality in a way that I was never taught to or encouraged to as a child or a teenager. Okay, so we lost direct capacity to hear and see, but now as the second seal of omniscience, Gene Key 17, opens, we are able to access this again, but only when we have done a deep purification of the astral emotional realm. So this second seal is our emotional realm. And it's a very, you know, we're basically having to really get a grip on our desire nature, our emotions, when we are able to really open to the second seal and the visionary potential contained in it through Gene Key 17, which is it's the study of omniscience. In other words, to be able to see things from every single angle. Okay, there's always a miracle with these asteroids, and the miracle here is that Apollo was discovered on the 24th of April 1932, which is amazing because today is the 24th of April. So I was so excited when I discovered that. And quite oddly, he then got lost. So he was only rediscovered in 1973. So he has this kind of elusive quality, might go missing. So he was discovered in Germany and is classified as a near-Earth object. There's a whole group now of Apollo asteroids called Earth crossers. As they cross the orbit of Earth when viewed perpendicular to the ecliptic plane. And Icarus is also one of these. So these are, in a way, the most dangerous objects to Earth because they're Earth crossers. So you get Venus crossers and Mars crossers, but Earth crossers are the ones potentially that could hit us. And so they're kind of named for these things like Icarus, I guess. So Apollo was discovered at 0 degrees Scorpio, which is gene key 50, line 5, and the current Venus star point we're in is 50, line 4, which was this first Libra star point for many hundreds of years at 29 degrees Libra. So it feels like a very significant point because we are also priestesses following the Venus cycle as well. So Apollo during the hybrid eclipse was at 15 degrees Libra and almost exactly opposing Chiron at 16 Aries. So Apollo is currently in the 57, line 1, moving from unease to clarity, to intuition, to clarity. And really, this is the main healing I've been experiencing in France in my time alone. So this is what I'm talking about, you know, the 57 and the 17th I've mentioned as well. You know, these are the keys that are all about the vision, the, you know, being able to see clearly. And yeah, and you know, this one day, before our ceremony, I saw the owl, which I mentioned in our ceremony, but I also saw a merlin and a buzzard on my same walk, just like these birds of prey everywhere that really have this incredible capacity to see. And this is what we are restoring in ourselves. So Valencia actually alerted me to the connection between Apollo and Chiron, as you know, Chiron was opposite Apollo, well, is right now when we were at the eclipse and now basically. So this is their connection. So fated to be overthrown by one of his children, Kronos, the godhead of the Titans, devoured them all upon their birth. In desperation, his wife Rhea hid the sixth child Zeus on the island of Crete. As Kronos searched earth and sky for Zeus, he came upon the Oceanid Philyra, I think that's how you say it, after whom he lusted. To hide from Rhea, he took the form of a stallion and mounted Philyra, and in due course, Philyra gave birth with great pain to a child named Chiron, with the upper body of a man and the lower body of a horse. Seized with shame and disgust at the sight of this monster, she abandoned him on Mount Pelion in Thessaly. So fortunately, Chiron was found and reared by Apollo, who taught him the healing arts, music, and prophecy, while Apollo's twin sister, Artemis, taught him archery and hunting. And Chiron excelled in every field, and is sometimes said that he invented pharmacy, medicine, and surgery. Indeed, the name Chiron means hand, skilled with the hands, and is related to our word for surgeon. So you might want to also look up your Apollo in relation to Chiron. Okay, so this is the last slide here. And again, this is like, just blew me away really. So I don't know how closely you can see it, but over here in the 5th house, you can see that the sun is, because it's the 24th of April, when Apollo is discovered, and the sun is in the same place at 4 degrees Taurus. But we also have the North Node, which is the karmic destiny, and Vesta, the priestess, at 4 degrees Taurus. And then we have Astraea, who's the goddess of sacred arts, very much connected to this energy at 0 degrees Taurus. So there's a phenomenal amount of healing energy actually right today. You know, today is the day when this massive healing energy is available to us. So yeah, so that's my presentation, and I'd love to hear, you know, maybe you know where your Apollo is. See what's in the chat. So yeah, so just kind of respond to that, you know, where's your Apollo? Yeah, so I'm going to pause the recording now and hand over to you.